Good morning, everyone. Sorry to interrupt. I always hate interrupting good conversation, but I see it's just after 9 o'clock here on a kind of a dreary Thursday, but appreciate everyone making it up despite the rain this morning. My name is Dallas Ackerman. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing with Liberty Schools, and I was just looking at our agenda this morning and realized this is the 6th year that we've had this Coffee with the Community series, and we've enjoyed connecting with the community each month. Before you leave this morning for our audience with us, please pick up a schedule. We have our first semester schedule published, and beginning next month, we will actually mix it up a little bit this year, where we will actually go back out into the community and have a few of our meetings out in the Liberty, Kansas City area. Actually, next month, our Safety and Security Director, Mr. Gary Majors, there he is actually in the back of the room, he is going to present, and we will take that meeting to Liberty City Hall. We'll be in the City Hall chambers for that meeting and might be joined by some SROs throughout the district and other emergency personnel. So hope you can join us for that. That is Thursday, October the 13th, and that will be at 10 a.m. This month we're an hour early, but we'll be back to our regular 10 to 11 a.m. Schedule. Also looking ahead, the rest of this semester, Thursday, November 17th, we will be joined by Colleen Jones and several of our students throughout LPS. She will present on not only the Northland CAPS program, but also some other great things and great programs to prepare our students for, to give students real life opportunities and to prepare them for college and career. And then coming up in December, Thursday, December 8th, we will be joined by our academic services team to provide an update on all the goings-on within their department, and there are a lot of exciting things taking place in academic services. So, again, thank you all for being with us. Also, a reminder: this will be taped and aired on our district's YouTube page and Channel 18. So with that, it's your lucky day. You only have to listen to me for about 2 minutes, and I will, yes, thank you, Gary. Gary giving me an ovation from the back, silent claps. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Jeremy Tucker, who today will provide us with a district update. So let's welcome him.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Dallas, for the introduction and teeing up this year as to what our Coffees with the Community look like. What a great opportunity to engage, albeit briefly. One of the things that we've tried to emphasize with our Board of Education over the course of this year is really trying to increase these types of venues and opportunities to engage our community on a variety of topics, from academics to operations and everything in between. Typically, we would use the Fall Coffee with the Community to provide you with an overview of our annual performance report and how we're doing with assessment and ACT and various indicators that the state looks at in terms of our accreditation. Unfortunately, that data is just now being released, and we don't anticipate that being fully available to the district until November. So we're going to bring that information to you a little bit deeper this fall. But again, we look forward to sharing you the successes as well as the areas of focus that we see for our district moving forward. To where what we wanted to do this morning is give you an opportunity to see a glimpse or a snapshot of a lot of things that go on throughout our school district, from operations to finance to human resources to academic services to the work of the Board of Education, as well as something that we're entering into this year that we've participated in the past, and that is the Advanced Ed accreditation process. So we're going to hit on a couple of different topics. I appreciate Dallas and his team putting this together, recording it so that others can view it. We get a lot of participation online, but again, thank you to all of you for being here this morning on this dreary Thursday morning. So let's dive into the content that I have for you this morning. The first thing that people always are curious about in respect to our purpose, our mission, our vision, our values, and you may have seen them before, but they're pretty succinct, and I think they're applicable to where we are today. As we enter into the 21st century and we continue to do the work that's most suited for kids, our mission: inspire and equip all learners to discover their voice and unlimited potential. a vision of a future-focused community with a passion for lifelong learning that is evident from the superintendent to the Board of Education to our youngest learners. And then finally, our core values of excellence, striving for integrity in all things, collaboration, innovation, and that continuous growth mindset. So those are really the foundational pieces that lead us into every single area and facet of what we do. Looking at the fall, we've had a great start to the fall semester. And part of that is in response to the work that goes on over the summer in preparation for the school year, whether it's getting facilities ready, professional development opportunities, a variety of things go on during the summer that people think it's quiet, but it's actually really our busiest time of year at the District Administration Center. The driver of all of that is our strategic plan and the categories that we have reflected there as we try to carry out the mission and the vision. And we'll talk a little bit within each of our cabinet areas, our departments, in respect to how we facilitate those goals and areas of mission-critical commitments in terms of the next several slides. At the start of the year in August, we actually began talking about, with our district leadership team, something we've been working on over the last 2 years. And that was really trying to identify who we are as a system. And it started with a concentric circles model, starting with our learners in the center, surrounded by our educational system, and then on the third ring, that really being our community. So over the course of the last 2 years, we really started unpacking what each of those areas look like. So with our learners in the center, we realized how we wanted them to complete the high school experience and what attributes we wanted them to have going into college or careers. But then we really started looking at their current reality, and that we have students that are gifted, we have students that are middle of the road, we have students that have special needs, we have Hispanics, we have white, we have black, we have Caucasian, we have rich, we have poor. So not only are espoused attributes when high school students graduate, but what does their current reality look like? And so that led us to a discussion about what does it mean to be learner-centered. And so we started identifying and really pulling in together some common themes that were consistent from the learner at the center to the educational system, and then the last piece, that being our community. The themes that we came up with are listed here in terms of relationships, well-being, partnership, communication, stewardship, continuous improvement, innovation. And then we started pulling in research. What does research tell us about each of these areas? And then finally, what programming do we have in place in and around all of these areas? We hope to be able to push this out later, either this month or next, which will be a document that contains really an overall perspective of what it means to be learner-centered in Liberty Public Schools. From the district leadership team's involvement, which includes all of our principals, our assistants, our executive directors, our directors, in contributing to this document. It's fluid, it's not static, and that we truly believe if that we're committed to a growth mindset, we should always be reflecting on how we're doing our work, instructionally, operationally, academically, even from the board level in terms of governance and policy decisions. So look forward to that coming out. So what does it mean to be learner-centered? It starts with relationships. But really when we talk about relationships, it's relationships in the context of 21st century learning, not necessarily the learning experiences that we had as adults. So relationships are of tremendous value, but sometimes that teacher comes alongside a classroom like this and perhaps is in a lecture setting. Other times the teacher may take a seat and the student is the one doing the teaching. Often you may see a classroom in where really a teacher is more of a mentor. And then other times that student may be the expert on content area that they're passionate about, where the teacher is learning from the student. So relationships in the context of 21st century schools looks and feels different. And so we're committed to exploring that and allowing our teachers to inform that process as they work for the best interest of kids. With that said, we also talk about informed decision making. We have a lot of data available to us at our fingertips, which is a tremendous amount of insight for us as we look at the individual progress of each child. But in addition to the data, we have the research that tells us what best practice looks like instructionally from a variety of students' perspectives. What do they need? What can we tailor to inform and better equip students for success in life? So that's what we mean by informed decision making. In addition, we can personalize the educational experience today better than ever before, partly due to that data, but then also due to a lot of the tools and interventions that our teachers utilize to meet the individual needs of every single student. The next area is called learner agency, which has everything to do with a student's voice and choice. So if you think about project-based learning, you think of passion-based learning, you think of inquiry-based learning, it's being able to take an area that a student might be interested in, fold that into the curriculum experience to be able to really spark their passion and interest in a given area. That can start as early as kindergarten, but certainly is very relevant for students that are in high school as they're considering what careers to pursue, what colleges to pursue, what they're going to do for the rest of their life. So we want to garner their voice, but then also at the same time provide them a certain amount of choice as they explore a variety of areas for their future. And the last piece we shared a little bit about is the growth mindset and what that growth mindset looks like from the superintendent to the student. If the student at an early age can grasp a hold of that lifelong learning desire and have that spark and sustain that throughout, what a great opportunity for their future. And so these are the 5 areas that we're working on over the course of this year and really exploring at every building and in every single department how they are fulfilling these areas, but then also be able to link arms with schools across the system to be able to create communities of practice, and that you may have teachers at Kellybrook that are knocking it out of the park in respect to learner agency, and others at perhaps, Warren Hills want to take advantage of that or want to learn about it, or at Franklin or at any of our other elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools. So we're excited about this work. It's kind of like flying an airplane while it's being built in the air. So we're excited to explore, but again, garner the research and the best practice along the way to ensure that we're doing what's best for every single learner. So when we started school in August, we welcomed 12,403 kiddos. And you see the breakdown of them according to each building. But as you look over here to the left, I want to point one thing out. This captures -3, -2, -1, which is actually our early childhood, 0 being kindergarten and then 1st through 12th grade. And so we have a grand total of 12,403 students pre-K all the way through grade 12. And so as we left last school year in the spring, even over the summer months, and then certainly into this fall, one of the things we watch very closely are class sizes and FTE as far as positions to be added or moved across the district and what that looks like. And that's an ongoing conversation really to the point of about mid-fall. By mid-fall, we feel like class size is really somewhat settled in. But then guess what? When the semester hits, we have some students that transfer out, but then we have other students that transfer in. So we're having that very same conversation. And then when the springtime comes, we're getting ready for the next year and what that anticipated growth looks like. We've shared in past coffees with the community and in a variety of venues our demographic projections moving forward. And for the next 10 years, we anticipate still seeing about a 2 to 3% growth rate as you watch the district continue to grow. We'll talk a little bit about that here later on as we talk about development that we're seeing throughout the community. And with that development, you have more rooftops, you have more families, you have more students. And so again, continuing to watch that. Our Board of Education works very closely with that demographic data. But then at the same time, as we look to facilities master planning, we're doing a tremendous amount of work with that right now, which we'll share in a moment. So what I'd like to do for the rest of our time is tease out 4 key areas: academic services, human resources, finance, and operations. And just to give you a glimpse of what we're working on over the course of this year. It's not comprehensive. There's a lot more of work that gets done in our complex system, but it's some of the highlights that we see going on and taking place across the district. With academic services, as I shared, staffing is certainly a concern as we monitor that and we look at schedules and we look at what those needs are, prioritizing those needs. In any school district, you're likely to start with the priority at the lower level in trying to decrease class sizes, and then you kind of work your way up as what those needs are and what those priorities look like. Over the last several months, back in April, the legislative session actually finalized House Bill 1490, which was in creating the Missouri Learning Standards. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone into that across the state over the last several years. What started as the Common Core State Standards ended up being sent to work groups for reevaluation, for revisiting, and then culminated in the passage with the legislature of the Missouri Learning Standards. There are a lot of similarities to the Common Core State Standards, but at the same time there are differences. And so what we've been doing as a school district all along, from the start of the Common Core State Standards to the transition to the Missouri Learning Standards, is informing teachers, preparing teachers as to what those standards would look like, but then also developing both the written, the taught, as well as the tested curriculum. in terms of integrating that into the school system. So we feel like we are well ahead of the game and ready for that continued transition of the Missouri Learning Standards. In addition to that, trying to align assessments to what those standards may look like. And that's really the next step for the state of Missouri. Since they finalized the Missouri Learning Standards, the next step is really at the state level to determine what state assessment looks like. Now, we certainly have an opinion on state assessments that occur at the very end of the year that are an autopsy-like assessment. And so instead, what we're wanting to advocate for at the state level is a series of assessments, brief assessments that occur throughout the course of the year that are more predicated on a student's growth from August to May than one final assessment in the month of May. We think there's tremendous value in being able to track, but also intervene in a student's deficiencies or challenges that they may need to accelerate them, rather than one finalized assessment at the very end of the year. So we're working with the Department of Education along with several task force and committees to be able to inform the next iteration of assessment in the state of Missouri. In addition to that, we have a tremendous amount of work that is done by our teachers, our instructional coaches, our academic services team in and around instructional practice. Through supports like professional development, working on those formative assessments and data that we see in grade level and content area teams, to intervention planning and how we can best support students that are struggling, but how we can also support students that perhaps are gifted or just need that additional challenge. And then also looking at student work protocols. We appreciate a variety of councils and committees that meet regularly, oftentimes in this building, to be able to tackle a lot of these areas. The last thing that I wanted to share within instructional practice is that we also emphasize innovation. Innovation does not necessarily mean that you're always trying something new, but at the same time, you're looking at what works and making it that much better. And so when we talk about innovation, we rely on our teachers to be able to drive that. In addition to that, we want to provide opportunities to engage with families to see what works best for their individual student, but then also in collective settings. So we've talked with our PTA council about any time they have a topic that they want to have addressed or really learn more about, be it at Kellybrook or be it at Franklin or anywhere else, we're willing to come and have that conversation to be able to provide information, but then also to be able to solicit feedback and ideas that parents may have to make certain that we're engaging with our families. We can always improve in that area. Another couple of items within academic services are the areas of student support. And we have a number that are listed here. One of the things that we piloted just a couple of years ago was something called Challenge Day, which is really about inclusion, diversity, and really kind of creating kind of some character attributes among students in which we want them to circle one another and support one another as compared to some of the bullying issues that we see, harassment issues that we see in society. And so we're excited to be able to expand Challenge Day at all of our secondary schools. It brings community members together, staff members together, and students together to really have this long, full day experience and deep conversations about the experiences that they're having as young people. Then also identifying how we can wrap around and provide supports over the course of a year. It creates clubs at certain levels, at like the middle level where you may have clubs of students that lead in these areas to provide programming and supports for kids throughout the course of a day. In addition, there's a tremendous amount of research right now on trauma and the impact of trauma on an individual's life. So issues that may have occurred at an early age can last and can stay with students and impact them on a lot of levels, from behavior to learning for the rest of their life. And so how can we better inform not only our faculty and staff, but also families? Because I would imagine in any family setting, if you were to speak and inform them about trauma, then they can probably begin to identify some things that have occurred in their own family or perhaps in their own life or their own child's life that are impacting them where they are today. What a powerful tool to be able to have that aha moment, but then also to be able to provide some resources and supports for those families, those mothers, those fathers, to help their children, or better yet, even understand themselves if they'd experienced trauma at an early age. So we're excited to be able to continue that conversation. A couple of other areas are supports for students at Liberty Academy who may just need something different than the traditional high school. How can we bring a variety of staff around them to be able to support them, from mental health to social services to assistance with the very things that they need to survive? along with all of the academic support. So we appreciate the work that they're doing at Liberty Academy. The legislature last spring also passed some bills related to dyslexia and efforts that will move our state forward in supporting students with those issues. So we're kind of pulling together some informed constituents, parents that are interested in this area that may have students of their own that have experienced dyslexia, and looking at how we can better serve those families. We're really in the planning and training phase right now, relying on some of our staff that have specialty in this area to be able to inform our direction as a school system as we continue to move forward and serve these students. Another area is conscious discipline, which actually started at our pre-K, and they brought in some trainers to be able to talk to what's appropriate response to behavior and things that you might see, whether it's at home or in a classroom, and how do you best respond to that and equip students and families with the skills to be able to manage behavior and get them on the right track. We actually facilitated training in this building. We've started expanding it from our pre-K to elementary teachers. We've also offered opportunities for parents to come and experience this training, as well as other child care providers throughout our community. And that it's not the public school and everybody else, but we want everyone to have this type of experience. And so we've opened our doors to a variety of service providers. The last thing that is really a critical piece, if you were to ask one thing that's probably most important, next to academics and a lot of the things we've talked about, one of the most critical things right now, I think, in education across the nation, certainly in our state, is the issue of mental health. And students that come to us with mental health needs that we are not equipped to serve, or we are not equipped to respond to. So bringing in other partners to be able to assist with that, you're going to continue to see that as a critical conversation throughout our community, throughout our state, as we look to the mental health needs of students and their families. For a long time, we've known those issues have existed, but as a society, we tend to be shy of having that conversation. And so what we need to be able to do is, A, have the conversation, but then secondly, have the willingness to be able to provide the support that students and their families need. And it's not just left solely to the school system. It's left to a lot of our community partners in terms of being able to meet the variety of needs that exist. The last thing on academic services that I wanted to share with you briefly is a process that we are beginning to embark on just as of last month, and that is advanced ed accreditation. The state of Missouri annually accredits schools through a program called the Missouri School Improvement Plan. We are in the 5th cycle of that, getting ready to determine what the 6th cycle of MSIP looks like. In addition to our state accreditation, which has a variety of indicators, the most of which are assessment, quite honestly, that occurs at the end of the year. We talked about that. In addition to that accreditation system, we have opted over the last several years to be able to participate in a national accrediting agency called Advanced Ed. You may have heard of other groups like NCATE. Advanced Ed is really the premier, the prominent accrediting agency across the nation. It certainly accredits schools internationally as well. So we are scheduled to walk through that process this year with an external review to take place April 2nd through 5th. This really won't impact the general public per se, but there will be a lot of opportunities for feedback through surveys, as well as participation on stakeholder groups, stakeholder teams, as that external committee comes in and speaks with our community members, but then also analyzes the survey data that we compile. So to look at its purposes, it happens every 5 years. We had the last Advanced Ed accreditation back in 2012. The process has changed significantly, and so we're working on that process and kind of going through it. The value of it is that it's very reflective. It is a self-evaluation, but as you may know, if you've done a self-evaluation, oftentimes you're harder on yourself than perhaps someone that's just coming in and doing that evaluation. But as we do that self-evaluation across our system in every facet, whether it's school or department, we also have to be able to show the proof of how we evaluate ourselves. So there's a portfolio piece along the way. In addition to that, as we said, it's evidence-based, and there's a tremendous amount of stakeholder input that we look to garner here in the next several weeks. The areas that are involved in the internal review are looking at improvement plans, student performance, self-assessment, as we mentioned, an executive summary, the stakeholder feedback diagnostic, as well as assurances. And albeit if you stop and look at this work, it may be overwhelming, but we've decided to break it down and create teams within our district leadership team and within our buildings to be able to chunk it out, so to speak, to make it a lot more palatable. It's not something that we want to overwhelm our administrators with, or our teachers or our staff, but if anything, we view it as an opportunity to tell our story, where we're at and the progress that's being made, but then also the areas of challenge and the deficiencies that we certainly want to focus on in moving our community and our district forward. So what it looks like within our system, we started in August informing our district leadership team. We also had conversations with the Board of Education as recently as this week at our study session. Garnering the stakeholder feedback at the latter part of this month. You can anticipate getting those surveys and opportunity to provide feedback. Working through reports over the fall, but then looking at the actual self-evaluation in January, collecting evidence and that being compiled in the month of February, submitting that in March to the External Review Committee. And their review actually takes about a month. Once they receive the district's documentation, they're looking at it prior to their visit to Liberty Public Schools. And then when they come in April, prior to leaving, they actually issue an accreditation finding. And so it's a tremendous amount of work if you're on this committee process. So that's the system view. At the school level view, similarly, looking at informing and training teachers and principals this month, garnering stakeholder feedback at the building level. They'll do a self-evaluation, compile evidence, submit the information via December, and then we're going to be working at garnering feedback from stakeholders through actual stakeholder interview groups. Those individuals will be identified when the external committee comes in. They will sit down across the table with groups of parents and ask, where's the district at? How are they doing? Do they do this? Do they do this? And really soliciting feedback to inform where we're at and where we're going. So we look forward to that opportunity. The actual timeline looks like this. They arrive on Sunday, April 2nd, Monday, April 3rd. We have a variety of presentations and meetings. The stakeholder interviews will take place during that time. Tuesday, April 4th, they will visit buildings and classrooms and have the opportunity to see the great work that's going on in schools. And then their final determination and closeout would be scheduled for Wednesday, April 5th, which we really view as an opportunity for us to celebrate, because we think we have great things going on in Liberty Public Schools, albeit we also have things that we can improve upon that we know will come about in this accreditation review. So, not to discredit the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the MSIP process. They are understaffed and don't have the opportunity or the ability to put this type of a system in place in Missouri. And so that's why we have the advanced ed process. We do believe, however, as DESE looks at their next iteration of accreditation, that they will be looking at advanced ed, their standards, their processes, and hopefully put a similar structure in place that truly is more meaningful for school districts, rather than the data that comes at the end of a school year. So, with that said, we look forward to that opportunity, but I want to switch gears to human resources, operations, and finance, just to share some highlights from that group. Bless you. First of all, in human resources, under the strategic plan, as we mentioned earlier, there are some key pieces that we wanted to highlight. The first of which is looking at diversity in our school setting. Whether it is the student composition, whether it's staffing, whether it's teachers, administrators, everything, we want to provide a diverse population in terms of teachers serving kids, staff serving kids. The reason for that is, if you are a student in a minority demographic, what better example for you than to have a mentor who is a similar individual who can tell the story, here's where I'm at, here's what I've done, here's how I got here, here's what I've done along the way, than someone that you look up to. It's not to say that they can't look up to others that aren't within their same demographic, but you really have the value in building that relationship. And so human resources, Dr. Vogelaar, Mr. Rosecrans, have been working on how we can best increase our applicant pools as we have people interview for positions from diverse populations, and then certainly provide students with those opportunities along the way. We walked through the process last year of an evergreen salary study with our classified staff. We were fortunate to be able to execute on the recommendations that came forward from that salary study, and are continuing to look at how we move forward with that in terms of staying competitive for the sake of retaining high quality staff. We have tremendous people in Liberty Public Schools, but on occasion we do lose some to various districts and other opportunities that come about. We want to recruit, we want to support, and then we certainly want to retain them along the way, and having the best quality staff that our students are so worthy of. In addition, we focused on health and wellness and continuing to increase participation in health risk assessments. Appreciate the work of our department in doing that and continuing to grow that. We look at seeing those numbers here in September. And then finally, as we look at onboarding and the process by which we bring people to our system, we've looked at moving to paperless onboarding and being able to convert files accordingly because of the number of staff that we have. So I appreciate the department working on that as well. One other thing I failed to mention is substitute fill rates. We have about a 96% substitute fill rate in our system, which is actually a good rate, but at the same time, there are a number of spots that we don't have filled on occasion. And so as we provide professional development opportunities, and on occasion teachers have to leave their classroom and we have a sub, we want to get as close to 100% fill rate as possible, rather than having that 4% lag. It was interesting, Dr. Vogelaar and Mr. Rosecrans attended a conference last week of Missouri education personnel professionals, and they learned from some of their peer districts that they have fill rates at about 80%. So we're very fortunate to have a 96% rate, but at the same time we want to continue to push forward with that and push that up and have quality substitutes in place whenever we do have to pull teachers out of the classroom for their professional development and continued growth. In addition to human resources, on the finance side, Ms. Cindy Sullivan and her team do a phenomenal job. As I transitioned into this school system 2 years ago, I found a very transparent and open process in place as it relates to our finances, our budget, due to some circumstances in years past that have caused us to get there, but we certainly do not want to move away from that and really having transparent conversations and being good stewards of the resources that are provided to us. With that said, we moved in 2015-16 to zero-based budgeting, really focused in on what those staffing needs are. We have projection documents that look to the next 5 to 10 years moving forward and what our finances look like, what our fund balances look like, to be able to sustain where we're at and the continued growth and planning that needs to occur. But at the same time, where we were in 2008 with the economic decline, there is a likelihood that at some point along the way, we will see another economic downturn. And so we need to be postured and ready for that. And so I appreciate Cindy and her team doing that. In addition, on the debt service side, we have worked closely with the Board of Education to restructure and refinance some of our bond issues. We've done several over the last 2 years. Most recently, we extended the life of one of our bond issues that will allow us to actually be able to, hopefully, go to the voters in the next 2 to 3 bond issues with no tax levy increases. That's an important piece because as we talk about tax rate at $6.44 roughly, we have one of the highest tax rates in the state of Missouri. And so we're approaching that with the idea that we need to be able to live within our means. And so no tax levy bond issues are critical for us as we look to the facility needs of the system moving forward and that continued 2 to 3% projected growth rate. So the Board of Education worked diligently at diving into debt management, bond issues, what that looks like, future projections, and we're able to make some critical decisions last spring that really set us up for the next several years as we continue to grow. Where we're at in 2016-17, continuing with zero-based budgeting, and it's not zero-based budgeting as a means to pull in the reins within schools and departments, but what really is implied is that you're planning more meticulously about what your needs are for that given year. So really nothing was told to district directors or principals that they could not get this or they could not get that, but instead, let's plan for your year and tell us what you need, and then we will budget accordingly. That's made us a lot more accountable at the district level, at the department level, at the building level, as to what our needs are, but then really advocating for that as we have those budget conversations over the course of the year. That focus of zero-based budgeting has really provided some specific support in these areas, professional development, because we do truly believe that teachers are in a constant pattern of growing professionally and developing beyond the master's degree or the bachelor's degree that they got in college, but really as to what best practice and support for student needs and what that looks like. In addition, we looked closely at open educational resources and content curation, in that today you have means like Amazon and the World Wide Web and Edmodo and different things like that that you can pull a lot of your educational resources from. but then at the same time contribute as a classroom teacher to the content that's available online. So the old-fashioned static textbook that's published in 2016, and as soon as it's on your shelf is outdated because the content and the material changes, really is allowed to be more current and accessible in moving toward open educational resources. And so we've allowed teachers to experiment and pilot with that. We have some examples from science classrooms to history classrooms of teachers that have dove in and are now creating their own textbooks and own material that are published and shared across the country, but certainly within Liberty Public Schools. So that's an exciting opportunity. And in all honesty, it does create some savings, but as a school system, what we've committed to is not to just pull that savings in and fold it back into the budget, but instead what we've committed to is to capture that savings and reinvest it in teachers through professional development, through training, through the support that they might need in developing some of that content, because we still want it to have as good a quality, albeit more relevant and more current than that static textbook that might be published by a publication company. Another area that we've focused on in budgeting is certainly the building needs and what those needs entail through that budgeting process and really being able to identify what the school level needs are. The last two things I wanted to share is we walked through the tax rate setting process in August. We were fortunate to realize a little bit of an uptick in our assessed valuation. And so from a local level, as you look at development throughout the community and in years where you have reassessment years, we want to continue to see positive growth in our assessed valuation. We are primarily a residential community. We have some industry, some commercial, but as you start looking across the Northland and comparing us to the North Kansas Cities or the Park Hill school districts, they have a much higher industrial base to pull from as it relates to assessed valuation, whereas we have a lot of rooftops. So as we talk about our assessed valuation at the local level, that's a critical piece to us. We project forward every year about a 2% growth in assessed valuation, which is incredibly low, but it certainly beats a negative growth rate that we saw back in 2008, 9, 10. We had been prior to that as high as 12 to 14% in our assessed valuation. I don't think we'll ever see those years again, but nonetheless, we want that to be a positive number moving forward. That's why that tax rate is such a critical piece, and that's why we truly believe that we have to work to try to live within our means. If we come forward ever with a tax levy increase, it will be to specific circumstance where we have a tremendous need, where our only alternative would be to make reductions to be able to provide the high quality learning opportunities that we want to provide for our kids. So more to come as we continue to monitor our assessed valuation and growth as a community as we watch our economy. 2016 summer, we conducted our annual state audit and appreciate Cindy and her team working very closely with our auditors from Westbrook & Company. Had a very favorable audit. There are always things that we can improve upon, but overall we're in good financial standing with a fund balance around 22 to 23%. That final report will be delivered to the Board of Education in October. Will be televised should you be interested in seeing the information, the findings from that report, as well as be published on our website. So they go through a variety of things from student attendance to food to operations and transportation, and really vet the entire system as to what we're doing, but really have a focus on the finance piece as it relates to how we're doing in our fund accounting, Fund 1 being our operations fund, Fund 2 being our teachers, Fund 3 being our debt management, and then Fund 4 being capital. It's how we deal with capital projects. To wrap it up with operations and some high points here, given that we do have two areas and two municipalities to work with, being the City of Liberty as well as the City of Kansas City, we're very attentive to the growth and development that's going on in both ends. And just as a side note, previously we were very heavy on the City of Liberty side as far as our student population. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is that student composition has shifted to the other side of Highway 35 in the City of Kansas City, to where we used to be 40% Kansas City, 60% Liberty, and now we're beginning to shift more to the Kansas City side, where it's pushing closer to 55, 60% in terms of that student composition. You know why. If you drive over there, you see all the development and all of the growth. So we're currently keeping tabs on a number of developments within both areas. I'll mention two within the City of Liberty side of things. That is the Aviara development that is planned in and around Liberty North High School. You can get online and view the template as to what that proposed development looks like. We're really any time now, anticipating a redevelopment plan from the City of Liberty to be able to look at and to be able to process and see the implications as it relates to the number of rooftops, both single-family, multifamily, the commercial that may go in there, but then also the anticipated student count that comes with that. The other area that I want to point your attention to is in South Liberty, and that being South Liberty Parkway. You've seen the construction on Highway 35. Appreciate the City of Liberty, the mayor and his staff, his team, the councilmen and women for working on that, and that's a lot of work and a lot of projects going on in and around Liberty, not to include the square and other things that they have going on. But we've worked to try to stay in constant contact with them, and that will open up from South Liberty Parkway over to 291 and tie into 35. And so you'll see a variety of development over the next several years, I would imagine, from business to multifamily to single family, and kind of a mixed approach in response to what's going on there. Appreciate Steve Anderson for his help in staying close to that. With the City of Kansas City, you may have heard the Shoal Creek Parkway. There's still opportunity for growth there within that Shoal Creek Parkway area, along with other things that are going on a little bit further west as you push through the Northland, but working closely with both city staff to be able to monitor that. Another exciting thing that I'm glad to share with you this morning is the Building Pride campaign. And I appreciate our co-chairs for being here this morning, Mr. Russ Weathers and Mr. Shane DeVolt, who are working with the committee to be able to really push this forward within our community. Several years ago on our facilities master plan, we had complex improvements, stadium improvements listed there that would be developed and funded privately. And so as we transition in, both Mr. Anderson and myself, we started having conversations of what that might look like. And at the same time that summer, we were completing a track at Liberty North High School. And so what we realized is we had two footprints in place. A nearly completed footprint at Liberty High School, but then a footprint that was underway with the construction of a track at Liberty North High School. And so really the question as it related to the facilities master plan was, do you commit to a single stadium, maybe similar to what Staley High School has, and if you've been there, it's a phenomenal spot. Or do you look to provide for instructional space, outdoor space, activity space at both buildings that both student bodies could benefit from, as well as the community as a whole? As we talked about that conversation and we talked with the Board of Education, the board and the administration came to the conclusion of working on two footprints and building them up, making them high quality, making them accessible to students, all activities, as well as our community. But again, something that would be privately funded. And so the board took a very big step earlier this spring, completed the work this fall, in starting with field turf. And really, field turf was the means by which you could get students on that space nearly immediately. Whether they're PE classes, whether they're band and early morning practices, whether it's football practice after school, soccer games, Relay for Life, community events, whatever it might be, could facilitate their experiences there at those two footprints. That first step is completed. So I thank the board for that work. The next step is the hard work with the committee and Shane and Russ's leadership to be able to share the vision, but then also solicit individuals that are interested in participating, corporations, organizations, companies that are interested in participating in this. When it's all said and done, the total project for the Building Pride campaign will be close to $6 million, of which the Board of Education has again tackled that first phase of providing field turf through district funds to boost those two projects at the high schools. So we're excited about that. You'll hear a lot about it. When you entered the building this morning, you probably saw some of the material there in one of the banners that kind of shared what the space could look like. But we really have a time frame of committing to that campaign for the course of this year. And so you'll see it again. You'll have opportunity to participate, but certainly feel free to share the information that we're sharing with you this morning to friends, neighbors, family members, and the like. So those guidelines are in place in terms of the project, and again, keeping our community informed along the way. That will lead us into a conversation about facility use, and that while we maintain the need to serve our students during the course of the day, we do open up our facilities to other groups, entities like Parks and Rec with the City of Liberty, other groups that want to utilize our spaces. The priority is certainly student programming and what programs we have to facilitate, but then outside of that, revisiting our facility usage agreement and really putting some structures in place where people can, at a low cost, utilize our space if that's something they're interested in doing. The last thing on the operations side I want to share with you is the facilities master plan. And this summer was an incredibly busy summer. for Mr. Anderson and his team as they worked with our architect, Hollis and Miller, and visited every single school site, every campus. We did this not too long ago in our last facility master planning process, but we came out and visited every single building with a formal assessment with a variety of indicators and criteria that literally walked through the building and graded the space. But then also had conversations with those building principals as to what do you foresee as your facility needs, your building needs, whether it's a renovation, a remodel, or maybe an addition, or maybe down the road even another school site as we look to those demographic projections. So what we will be doing this fall is taking those assessment results, combining it with our demographic projections and our demographic study, the update that we did just this last year, and then really as a Board of Education identifying what our needs are, garnering feedback from our staff and our faculty because they're in those buildings every single day. They're in classrooms that may be tight or may have a tremendous amount of space. They know the storage areas, they know the classroom spaces that are available, but then they also have a sense of what the academic and instructional needs are to provide for educational experiences for kids. So garnering their feedback to inform what the needs are, but then also with the board, work through the process of prioritizing what those needs are for our facilities. As we look to the future, every 3 to 5 years we anticipate a bond issue. As I mentioned earlier, hopefully we'll be able to set ourselves up for the next several bond issues at a no tax levy increase. We might put something on the ballot in around 2018, 2019 that has yet to be finalized. But then before we put anything to our voters, we would have the data that backs up the need. That has then been prioritized by the Board of Education. That is then shared with our school community as well as our community as a whole in terms of what that need is prior to anything being put to a vote of our public or our voters. So with all that said, here's an example of the meeting schedule that we had earlier this summer, but then coupled with that is the update to our facilities master plan and where we're heading with a very tentative timeline as to what a potential bond issue might look like. So there's a lot of work to be done. But again, my hope this morning is to just give you an example of what we do, some of the highlights in all of these areas. As you can imagine, public education is incredibly complex. But as I started the conversation this morning, as a Board of Education, as an administration, it is truly our desire to have more engagement opportunities, to share some of the information that we've shared or maybe go even a little bit deeper, but then at the same time to solicit your ideas, thoughts, concerns, suggestions. So there's a variety of venues where that can happen. It can happen at Coffee with the Community over the next several months as we enter into the school year. It can happen one-on-one. It can happen in email, over phone. We've even talked about doing a Facebook Live where we set up Facebook in the evenings and field questions from our audience or from our public. So look forward to seeing some of those interactions. But if there's ever anything that we can do to improve our engagement and communication, by all means, we're committed to doing that in a transparent and an open dialogue and conversation. Last thing I wanted to share is the work of the board. I appreciate Angie Reed for being here this morning. Others that come frequently to a variety of school events, we can keep them pretty busy on the board. But through their work sessions, their monthly board meetings, you can see a variety of things on their perpetual calendar. This is the work of the board in terms of the things that they work diligently at and some of the conversations that we've had here this morning. So I appreciate each of them for the work that they're doing and will continue to do. With that said, I want to close out my portion, but then certainly open it up for any questions from the group. If there's any questions that you have, we'd be glad to answer them, and certainly we'll stick around afterward as well to field your questions. Anything this morning? Okay. You have, yes, go ahead.
I don't know, I mean, do you want parents now, or does it matter?
Feel free.
Oh, gosh. I just had, I guess, the first really positive thing is we're a second year at Discovery Middle School,
Yeah.
and Dr. Julie Moore is just amazing, and I just really, really appreciate her concern and her tenacity, and I just think she's amazing. So I just wanted to pass that along.
We will let her know that for sure.
Yes, very much appreciate her. The class size, I know you kind of commented on that, and I believe my daughter's in 5th grade at Shoal Creek, and I think she's up to 28 students. So I was just curious about where we go from here. And then I had one more comment, and I don't know
Sure.
if I should say them all at once or not.
No, you're fine. So with monitoring those class sizes we shared, probably the best gauge are the statistics or the data that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed provides us. And it gives K through 5 primarily, because typically as you get into secondary, some of those class sizes get a little bit bigger. K through 5 really is the focal point and what that optimum grade level looks like. So we really try to stay close to those DESE standards, whether it's kindergarten class size or 5th grade class size. So not only looking at Shoal Creek, but then as you add a position here or take a position away, you also have to look across the entire system. So like at all 5th grade classes in every campus across the district. So our cabinet meets every Friday morning. And I would say probably from April to October, there's not a week that goes by where we're not having this conversation. So believe me, it's on our radar. All the way down to the grade level and the class, the school and the teachers that are involved there. What ends up happening, and part of it is a budgetary piece, but then again, if we see there's a need, then we're going to fill that need, even if it's middle of September, even if it's the first part of October. And so looking at that 5th grade, that may be at, you think it's at 28?
I thought they'd already
Okay.
lost
And
one,
we
which I
have the
thought
data.
was-
I can't tell you off the top of my head. But looking at that class size, working with Dr. Corum, working with the principal there, Ms. Bowman, Mr. Myrick, working with the classroom teachers even, engaging from them, hey, how's it going? You guys doing okay? Soliciting their feedback to where if they say, yep, we're managing it, because they don't want to lose a student if you add another classroom. And this far in, even just a few weeks, students are making those connections with teachers. But at the end of the day, if the student or the teachers and the principal come and say, we really need to add this section, we're not going to stop short of doing that, and that we would see that need and fill that need. But at the same time, we do have to look across the entire system. Because as soon as you add that position there, what happens to that average class size in those 5th grades? It may go from 28 down to below the DESE standard, whereas you still may have some classrooms across the system that are up to that ceiling. So believe me, we're attentive to it, and we've made some adjustments even as early as this fall with some of the other schools and even some younger grade levels by adding teachers or adding a building aide or a paraprofessional to provide that support. But it's not done in a vacuum, nor is it done without considering where the teachers are at in that grade level and the input from that principal. So I would say stay tuned, because
Okay.
we're still looking to that data, albeit we may opt to stay the course for the remainder of the year. But yeah, thanks for asking that, because I know it's on a lot of parents' minds, and it's also on a lot of teachers' minds too. So, good question. You had another comment or
My
question?
last concern is phones. We were kind of talking about our kids and phones when we sat down, and I've talked to Dr. Moore about this a couple of times. I've got some friends in different states, and in other states, oftentimes at the beginning of class, the students are required to turn in their phones. They have a cubby for their phones, and I've mentioned that a couple times, and it's been greeted with laughter, which is not exactly the, my son
Sure.
has told me stories of kids that supposedly are reading and they're just playing games on their phones behind their books. And I know this is going to be, we're in such a changing
Right.
environment,
Right.
but has that been anything that's been considered maybe for the future, like a phone check-in policy?
Not a particular check-in policy. I can speak to where we've been and where we are now, and not just in Liberty, but in any school setting, the other two districts that I worked in, from banning cell phones entirely to teachers that see the value in, okay, guys, I want to find out, XYZ or a particular fact or something like that. And so they have a resource at their fingertips. A lot of them do, not all of them do. But with that said, with us being a one-to-one environment, they have a device provided by the district that has filters and such, which we've been working through some of those issues. But here of late, they can access whatever they need to access without their cell phone per se. So I think that's a building level decision, and really even if it's a classroom level decision in the monitoring and the holding kids accountable to it, that may be something to explore. I've not heard of others that are using a check-in per se. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with me. You've shared that with Dr. Moore as well. you
I
said.
did. I
Good.
know it's even been an issue at Shoal Creek.
Sure.
Which is nuts,
Yeah.
in my perspective, at the
And again, it's
elementary, but-
becoming more and more prevalent, because the next thing you know, we're having conversations about, do you check in your smartwatch? And that we have kids now that have smartwatches. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a complex one, but again, I don't think we're, as a society, moving backward. If anything, you're going to see variations of technology that we've not even considered or thought of. So definitely a concern. Other questions from the group? Yes, ma'am.
I've heard you talk before about the 2 to 3% growth in student population each year. And you've talked today about bond issues or tax going to the public without needing to increase taxes. But at what point are the buildings that we are at going to be at capacity, and are we going to need more schools?
That's another presentation. Because believe me, we've got the projections and the data that can spell that out for you. Applied Economics is a group that we've worked with going on a decade, if not longer, who is a demographer out of Phoenix, Arizona. And we're really in a schedule of every 2 to 3 years re-racking that demographic study and seeing, based on the growth, they connect with city government, they connect with the developers, they connect with the architects, people that we probably don't even know, to make the best informed decisions as to what that projection looks like. And so they have a report that's pretty substantial that we can pull from neighborhoods, and neighborhoods go through cycles, and that if it's a brand new neighborhood, it's got this number of people, this number of students, and you can track them over time to the point where that neighborhood literally subsides in its student population, but then it cycles back around through resale and stages of life, right? So we've got that level of detail. But then for the district and the Board of Education, what we're able to do, and you'll hear hopefully more about this fall, is we're able to look at those facility assessments and those needs, mirror it to that demographic projection, and see where those numbers are. So prior to the economic decline, our uptick in enrollment was anywhere from 5 to 6% growth. So it's stabilized somewhat, but it's still growth. But right now we have a bubble that's really working its way through, you mentioned Discovery, the middle level. And so that middle level population, your class sizes may be a little bit bigger because of that bubble. We can say today, however, we have one mobile unit that has classrooms as far as students in it. We have one at Franklin Elementary, and then we're talking about alleviating a little bit of need of space at the academy until we're able to procure the final portion of that complex, which we just did. So it's there. We monitor that. We track that. On the kindergarten side, that's the other thing where you want to see. You want to see where your class sizes are coming in, and that not too long ago we surpassed the 1,000 mark as far as 1,000 kindergartners coming in. And so just continuing to watch that, whether that grows or whether that stalls a little bit. So you start seeing that information. So then when you talk about a bond issue preliminarily, would we need a middle level? Perhaps that's kind of what it's looking like, albeit that decision is not finalized by any means. Will we need an elementary school? Perhaps, or additions or renovations to existing spaces. The other conversation, I'll mention it, albeit it's a touchy one, is do we have conversations about redistricting and boundary changes? We had that conversation not too long ago, and I think it was very productive. But at the same time, can some of those facility decisions be made so as not to disrupt those boundary changes? Or are they inevitable and forthcoming as we see new developments popping up and we end up seeing spaces that may include a school along the way? So I don't know if that answers your question. It's there. We certainly will have that conversation this spring or this fall as we look at the demographic projections coupled with the facility needs and priorities. So good question. Anything else from the group? This has been great. Thank you all for being here and your participation, your questions. We will stick around. We have several of our district administrators here that would be willing to connect as well if you have questions for them. So hope you have a great rest of this day and this week and a great fall semester. So we'll see you next time for our next Coffee with the Community. Thank you all.